Welcome back, Pathless Peddlers, and today we're mixing it up on the channel. Instead of doing just another bag review, we're going to actually start doing some interviews. And our first guest, he's a really well-known, well-respected in the bikepacking community. He's done some pretty amazing things. I'll just read off a couple things from his resume here. He was a 2011 Tour Divide winner. He is currently the founder of bikepackingroots.org. And not only is he an athlete, but he's also a scholar. He teaches geology at Prescott University. And we're going to cover a bunch of topics from his bikepacking and geology class to bikepacking roots and where he sees bikepacking going in the future. So without further ado, we're going to talk with Kurt Refsnider.
Hey, how's it going, Russ?
Was that okay interview or intro?
Yep.
Well, thanks for joining us today, mixing it up on our YouTube channel here. So I really want to kick things off and talk about your bikepacking and geology class. It looked like there was a cool write-up recently on the Radavis. Can you tell us how many students take that class and what's the format?
Yeah, so that write-up was from a student named Locke Hassett, who is a pretty experienced bikepacker already coming into the class, and he ended up being a teaching assistant for us in that class. And we being myself and Caitlin Boyle, who was the kind of co-developer and my co-instructor for that class, all 3 times that we've taught it now. And we've had every time now, I guess, 8 or 9 students that take it. So it's a fairly small group, but as soon as you get 8 or 9 students and another 2 instructors on bikes, that's a pretty big crew of bikes and a pretty big number of things to go wrong and a big group to manage with different speeds of riders and everything. So that's turned out to be a pretty reasonable number for doing something like this.
So the people that take it, what's their level of ability and skill in terms of bikepacking? Are they all fairly new? Are they fairly experienced? Or what's the gamut?
So coming into the class, almost none of the students we've had have bikepacked before, and the exception to that are usually a couple students that have been teaching assistants for us, including 2 of the 3 teaching assistants we've had on the bikepacking side have ridden the Great Divide mountain bike route, so very experienced in that aspect. And the other students pretty much all have had a decent amount of mountain bike background. So we need riders that have a bit of technical skill already, but they don't need to be incredibly competent technical riders. We do a mix of dirt road and single track in that. So we need riders that can manage, 25, 30 miles on some trail throughout a day, but they don't need to be, super strong athletes or anything like that. We want it to be fairly open to folks who already are cyclists.
Right. Does the class fill up pretty quickly? I imagine it must. It looks like a super fun way to learn.
It does. Yeah, there's always a lot of enthusiasm. We don't quite have enough interest. Prescott College is really small. We've got about 275 students on campus in the undergraduate program. And so we run the course every other year in order to just have enough students with the cycling background and the desire to do multi-day trips like that with that academic curriculum in conjunction with it. And the general format has been a few days on campus, and then we have basically 3.5 weeks to work with. The course is 4 weeks long, and that's all the students take during that little block of time.
Oh, that's cool.
And so we do, over the years, we've done either 4 or 5 multi-day trips in the Colorado Plateau region, and really focus on studying the geologic history of the Colorado Plateau region along each of those trips. And so they're sort of structured that generally each trip we get up into younger and younger parts of the rock sequence and more recent parts of the story. And we have a van and big trailer that we get from one place to the next for those trips. And the trips gradually get longer, starting out with usually like a 2-night, 3-day trip, and then progressing up to a 5-day length trip for the final one.
So what does homework and the final look like for this class?
Yeah, so that's been something that's kind of evolved, and trying to figure out the best way to incorporate the kind of academic rigor in it in conjunction with the physical rigor and the general exhaustion that goes along with bikepacking, even when you keep the days fairly mellow. it's just a tiring activity for anyone, especially newer bike packers. And so the academic side of it is split between a geology curriculum and an adventure education curriculum that Caitlin leads, which is a combination of kind of leadership skills specific to managing groups on bikes and route planning and learning how to deal with all the logistics and figuring out, what do we need to actually take for food? What do we need to take for water? What are the risks that we're going to be potentially facing on this? How do we set ourselves up to be most successful in a trip like that? So one of the goals is to be able to send riders out of this class with enough competence in it that they could potentially lead other groups of students or of individuals doing the same thing.
Right.
And so it's a tremendous amount of material that we try to cram in there. And so on the adventure education side of it, there's a fair bit of getting students in leadership roles and having them plan routes. So on this course, the final trip was back here in Prescott with the students planning and executing their own trip. So figuring out all the logistics for it and using a scenario basically like you're going to be taking out a group of high school mountain bikers that are doing their first bike packing adventure one night. What do we need to do to make it successful and have them have a great time and all of that. And so that was a new way of trying to really facilitate that development of the students' skills. This time in the leadership realm. On the geology side of things, it's a big mix of first they need to just get a handle on what is the general geology of the region and learn some of those principles, basic geology, and then building from there with range of presentations and having them kind of develop a chart with the stratigraphy of each region, the layers of rocks and the stories that each rock tells and how it fits together with the layers that we then see in another place on the trip to get a bigger spatial view of just what was the region like at this time, describe the landscape at that time, and understand why it was evolving in the way it does. So that's a lot of what we go into. There's no final exam for it. By the end of the class, they're pretty exhausted from everything, and so they've got a big folder that they put together that shows everything that they've done and learned along the way, and that's usually a big part of their final assessment.
Cool. So one last question about the class. Was it a hard concept to pitch to the college? Were they like, you're going to do what with our students?
No. It was, and that's one of the really cool things about Prescott College and teaching here. I actually pitched the idea when I was interviewing for this job 6 years ago, and there already was a class that was begun by by my predecessor here, the former geologist, that was called rock climbing and geology. He was an incredibly skilled climber and had written guides for all over the Southwest. And so he had taught that course for, 15 years or something like that after he developed it. And he's like, oh, you should, combine your passion with your teaching and figure out a way to do it, because that's when the students are going to gain so much more. And so I pitched that idea in my interview, and they're like, whoa, you could do that? And so then after I got here, it's like, okay, this is actually really, they want me to do this, but getting someone like Caitlin on board that has the background in such immersive field teaching and bringing an academic curriculum into the field in that setting was critical in putting together a really solid plan for a course that the students are going to get a lot more out of than just learning how to ride their bike in amazing places.
Right.
So
cool. That's awesome. I love the whole idea of, taking a bike trip, but layering it with some other kind of thing, either cultural or, geological, just so that, really sinks you into the environment and you learn something from the trip.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. And it connects you to where you are in a so much more impactful way than just riding through a place, but not knowing anything about it. Yeah. As soon as you start to learn more about any of those layers of the landscape, you become so much more connected to that place.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like I've gotten into fishing a lot. And before I got into fishing, I just look at water and go, oh, there's a pretty river. But now every time I pedal by a river, I'm like, there'd be a fish there. That's a good riffle. Or, is that pool deep enough to hold fish? Or, so just all those layers of knowledge really kind of affect your experience when you're on the bike. So I think this is a great segue into bike packing routes. So tell us a little bit about why it started, and let's talk about the new route you guys released. So what was the impetus behind bikepacking routes?
Yeah, so bikepacking routes was I guess it's been sort of in the works for over 2 years now. And it started off as a vision that Caitlin and I were kind of just brainstorming about while we were bike packing in, I think, South America, doing a month-long trip through Patagonia, chasing as much rugged trail as we could and facing the challenges of, we had put in a ton of time planning this trip and finding all these trails that we didn't know anything about. We're kind of skeptical if they were actually going to be there on the ground, got there, if they actually linked through. And so it was one of those things that kind of adventure is fantastic. Like, I love it. Getting into a completely new place, learning about it, and seeing trails that you've never been on. But the element of the planning that goes into that and the uncertainty is something that is kind of prohibitive. Like, a lot of people either don't have the time to do that or the background to do it, or they just don't have the desire to go kind of in one of these unfamiliar places and just see how things go. And at that point, there was kind of a paucity of bikepacking routes that have been developed in different regions of the U.S. that have a lot of really good planning information to allow people to just jump into these trips and know exactly what they're getting into and feel comfortable that their skills and their background are going to allow them to really have a great time on that route. And they're also there's a bunch of self-created routes that are popping up on great sites like bikepacking.com and things like that. And some of the routes are phenomenal. And some of the routes, you don't quite know what you're going to get, and there's not a lot of upkeep of them. People submit them, and then there's no one looking after them, making sure that, as things change on the ground, that the route evolves through time. And so our goal was, initially we were thinking, let's figure out a way to start developing some longer distance dirt routes. Some of them are very single track focused. Some of them are very dirt road focused, and make them kind of consistent, have a really solid vision for what that sort of route will provide in terms of an experience, and try to use that as a way to get more people out bike packing and not feel like they're getting in over their head necessarily with the route that they're going to take. So that was kind of the initial vision. And then as that progressed, we started thinking a lot more about what you and I were just talking about, with how do you really connect people to landscapes and make those experiences even more impactful for folks, and coming up with a way of actually really educating folks about the landscapes through which they're riding, whether that's the geology of the places or different stories about the natural history of those areas or the people history of those areas and conservation issues in those areas. And so that kind of educational side that Caitlin, who's our conservation education coordinator, and she was kind of a co-founder for the organization with just brainstorming all these ideas and figuring out a vision for it. Both of us bringing in our educational backgrounds to it. Bikepackers have unique needs in terms of the places and like the desire for these experiences in large landscapes where you are, pedaling for days on end through not necessarily wilderness, but through wild places. And we need these kind of large tracts of public lands to do that, at least if you're trying to stray off just pavement and dirt roads and get on trails and into the backcountry. And so there's an element of also kind of educating people about the need for conserving these landscapes, and for, in today's political realm, the public lands issue and the role that public lands play in what we love doing. And so there's an advocacy side that's been growing that's focused on those issues that we're getting into as well. So it's kind of a very multi-pronged mission that we started off with. Right. And so the route development side, the advocacy side, and the kind of environmental education side of it. And we've been pushing after all of those this year since we launched publicly in May. So it hasn't been that long, but we've released three new routes, all in the western part of the U.S., Colorado, a 1,200-mile route, very adventure route across Utah into Colorado, and a small, like a 200-mile one in northern Arizona that expands on the popular Coconino Loop that's been around for quite a while, getting in some remote country in the San Francisco volcanic field. So really cool area there. So
when you guys create a route, is there like what's the criteria? Is there a minimum level of service on the routes, or because I feel like some people, like you were saying, will publish, self-created routes, but sometimes they feel more like rides rather than kind of like a repeatable route that other people could do that would be like sustainable,
Yes.
respectful of the environment and people that live there.
Yep.
So,
Yep. Exactly. So that's a big part of the very intentional approach we take to route development. So it is much more than we go out and spend 4 days bikepacking somewhere and call that a great route. Maybe it is a great route. Maybe we would have put a ton of planning into it
right.
and it turned out to be phenomenal. But for example, this route, the Wild West route, that's a new one that we've pretty much completed all the reconnaissance of and are going to be releasing in about a year's time with maps and everything. That one is a dirt road, 4x4 road oriented route that starts at the Mexican border in southern Arizona, traverses up through Arizona, Utah, and Idaho, huge swath of Idaho, and then just a little corner of Montana. And it's designed to have a wild riding experience, so in some of the big wild places in the West, while making it mostly non-technical. So there's almost no single track on it. There's some rugged Jeep roads in places, but we want it to be more of a kind of faster, mellower riding surface than a single track route. So making sure that the route is, like, the different sections of it are consistent with that experience and have minimal, really rugged hike-a-bike type sections. There'll be a few in there, but only where there's no other option. And then thinking about water availability and resupply options and things like that. That's critical. That we don't want, like some routes, like the 1,200 mile route we have across the Colorado Plateau called the Plateau Passage. That one is very much an adventure route and is designed to get people way out there.
Right.
And some people want that. It's not one for beginners. That's for advanced bikepackers, and you may have 4 or 5 days in between resupply locations. And the Wild West route, trying to keep things much closer, that the biggest distances are going to be 2.5 days or something between resupplies, and popping into small towns for resupply options and then getting right back out there whenever possible. And a lot of the reconnaissance at least in Arizona and Utah, was much more than just like, is this the best way to go? But okay, there's water here and there's water there, and this is a long way in between. So are there actually water sources here that might be reliable, right, that we can put the route through? So so there was a lot of on the ground looking at different options for that sort of consideration, and then also just the flow of the route. And if you look at a map of, say, Idaho, there are a bunch of ways to connect two places together, going shortest way around, following valleys, going over big passes, and trying to develop a route that has the best flow in between these different areas. So you don't want to have like really rugged mountain section after another, when there's a nice mellow valley over here with a dirt road that runs up it, that you could hop over to that, have some hard riding here for a little while, and then a couple mellow days or something like that over in this area before diving back into the mountains. And so really thinking about how it's going to feel riding it for not just me or somebody else who's been bikepacking for a long time, but somebody who maybe this is their first really long trip, and 2,500, 3,000 mile route can't just be rugged and ending the whole time. Even if when you're scouting it just piece at a time, it's like, whoa, these are awesome mountains. I love how many mountains there are in this route. When you put it all together, that might not actually feel great for most folks.
So in terms of like route creation, how do you guys even begin? Is it mostly looking at maps first, and then how do you ground truth the route in the process?
So it starts off with concept more than anything. Like, okay, what about a route that does this or is in this place? Or looking at a map of the country and thinking, okay, well, like we've got another project in the Midwest right now that'll be getting off the ground this next year. That's up in northern Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, northern Michigan, which is a region that has tons of riding potential, amazing single track networks in a few different places with hundreds of miles of trail each. And thinking about, okay, what if there was a route that was single track oriented through all these little communities and helped connect all of those together and put together, a 800 mile route or something like that, with single track connection emphasis. Or with the Wild West route, it was thinking, okay, this part of the country is absolutely amazing. The public lands issue is something that we really want to highlight. What could we do to put together a route that does that? And
why do you think starting with a concept is important?
I think that's what provides the vision for a route and provides kind of the goals for it. So it's not like, our goal is to just develop a route in any specific place necessarily. It's to provide a certain kind of experience for folks. And we do want to make sure that those experiences are available for people that live in different regions of the country. But like I could think of a tremendous number of routes that I could put together that start right from my house here in the mountains right above Prescott, Arizona. But what's the experience of that going to be? Is it something that we can tie in with any kind of educational message or conservation message or advocacy message or something like that? And so I think a lot of it comes from what do we want people to potentially be getting out of this? And a little bit of it is the opposite. What do we think people might want to be getting out of routes? And so we've done a bit of surveying of folks trying to understand more about what they're looking for and what kind of experiences. And it's all over the map, but There are definitely some trends that we've seen. So it really, I think for us, that initial vision is, and the concept is really important to as a starting point.
Right. Do you think there are some routes that shouldn't be published?
That's a tough question. I think, from a standpoint of, if an individual makes a route and puts it out there, I think as long as it's really clear what riders are getting into if they're going to go out there. So if I don't think anyone is ever intentionally misleading about what a route is going to be like for somebody else, but I think there are a lot of people that their awareness of what their experience is like compared to what somebody else might have, what kind of experience somebody else might have when they get out in that same area could be very different. And so that's something that I think for me that awareness has really evolved through teaching the bikepacking class and just seeing firsthand what is it like when you get first-time bikepackers out in a place like X or Y or Z. And then there are definitely some routes that have been published that I've seen that either go on private land without permission or through areas where bikes aren't supposed to go on public lands, things like that. And so that's a huge problem that I see. Like we spend a lot of time trying to make sure that everything that we're doing is absolutely legal, which sometimes gets really frustrating trying to do with land managers that, there's this section of road that is closed in the spring to not, for example, up in Utah, I'm working on an issue that it's closed to wheeled vehicles, basically. And the first person I talked to said, no, it's just non-motorized. And then the district ranger was like, no, it's actually non-motorized or any wheeled vehicle, non-motorized or not. Wow. And I asked him why. He's like, I don't actually know. So things like that. And, I've had the other end of the spectrum that down in southern Arizona on the Wild West route, there's a section of BLM land. It's a national conservation area. They've been working on a long distance trail through it, which is a very remote feeling trail. And the northern part of it hasn't been finished. And I was working with a BLM official down there trying to figure out, okay, you're not done with this. They have no plans to actually finish it in the near future because it involves a bridge that they don't have money to build. And so he was very helpful in trying to figure out how can we actually get around that? How can we make use of state land nearby? There's an old railroad easement that he looked into that we actually can't use, even though it sees plenty of public use. It's private technically. So he was very helpful in that and found some connections for us to use. So it's all across the spectrum, but it really, I think some of those links take a fair bit of homework to make sure that where you're sending people is legit. That's important.
Yeah. So I've got two more questions. How do you kind of imbue the spirit of conservation and being a good steward to the land in a route? Or how do you see spreading that message to the bikepacking community at large?
Yeah, it comes back to that, helping people connect to the landscape. And if you say you're going to ride across a state with a lot of public lands and don't know anything about where you are, never been there before, ride the whole route, love the scenery, love the experience, but you don't learn anything along the way, you don't really develop much of a connection to that place. And you don't learn anything about, why those lands are there, why they're open to the public, anything like that. And conversely, if you take a group of folks and thinking about like a group of students, for example, into a place and have them start exploring the history of it and exploring, how did this national forest actually form? What's the story there? Mm-hmm. And why did this area end up getting conserved over here? What were the issues? Who actually stood up to make that happen, and where their passion for it come from? And learn a little bit about what's unique about the environment there, whether it's the geology or the ecology or any of that. Suddenly then there's this connection that forms between the rider and the place they're in. Mm-hmm. And that right there generally makes people much more concerned about making sure that place exists in the future for other mm-hmm. people to enjoy and gets conserved. And there's a whole bunch of evidence in the literature and in studies that very clearly show that connection to place, that sense of place, mm-hmm. instills a conservation ethic in folks.
Yeah, there's that saying, if you know it, you love it, and if you love it, you protect it.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. So that's what we're going for. And it definitely takes a fair bit of time. Like, it's easy to, I shouldn't say easy. It's fairly straightforward to put together a really nice bikepacking route, get all the reconnaissance done, put together some resources for it so people know what they're getting into. But then taking it to that next level and providing all this other educational material that can help people make that connection, that takes a fair bit of extra time and research, especially in places with which you might not be familiar as a route developer. So we've got a fair bit of energy going into that. And it definitely takes time, but it's something that we all feel is really an important part of our mission. So we're going to keep doing that, and hopefully those resources are just going to get better and better with each new route we develop.
Yeah, cool. So we've got a little bit more time. I want to kind of pivot to trends, and one of the things that I see, I don't know if you agree, but route developers put in a lot of resources in creating a route, and for the most part, the availability of the route has been free. And mm-hmm. there's never been an issue of like, should route developers charge for the finished product? Should they be compensated? I mean, to me, it doesn't seem sustainable to have like quality routes and not have, the people developing the routes, make a living or at least like pay for the route development.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it takes a lot of time to do that. And there are quite a few amazing routes that have been put together by people purely out of passion, that they love this place. They want a route that goes from here to here, whatever their motivation may be. And what usually happens is, what I've seen is that route gets developed, people start riding it, but then whoever created it moves on to other passion projects, which is great. That's usually the type of person that it is, that they just are incredibly passionate about whatever they're currently working on. Mm-hmm. And the resources for those routes maybe don't get updated or things like that. And I think that is a big problem, because conditions on the ground really do change tremendously. And so routes need to evolve, resources need to evolve. And
so maybe it's kind of an evolution of just a one-hit wonder to kind of institutionalizing some things about the route. So there's kind of constant updates.
Mm-hmm.
And just
and somebody needs to be looking after and coordinating all those updates. And like, if you're putting out a guide to a route where there's, water sources or stores that may continue to be open or closed, like, those are important things that people rely on, and definitely need some oversight to it. And I think getting back to what you were talking about, the resources that go into it, there are quite a few relatively short routes that get developed by individuals that are great, that they can, just from wherever they live, they can pretty easily scout and put things together in these places that they're familiar with already. So they already know the best ways through. But longer distance routes that are on the order of a few 100 miles or 500 miles or more, which are the ones that really provide these huge experiences for folks, up all the way up to like expedition scale experiences. Those are things that individuals just generally don't have the resources or the time to develop. Right. And so that's where we're putting a lot of energy, are these longer ones, and trying to coordinate with some of our regional advisors in different parts of the country that can really provide their input in the areas that they know well, and make each section of the route as good as possible from local knowledge. So I think it is a big question of scale, and resources needed for a small route, and even upkeep for a small route, pretty reasonable. But once you get to something fairly substantial,
Right.
it's a lot for individuals to maintain for any length of time. So I think in that sense, moving, having an organization like Bikepacking Routes that focuses on creating these long dirt routes and then maintaining them down the road is something that the community really needed, and that's the reception we've had since we launched in May has been hugely positive in that sense. So I think people definitely agree that that's beneficial for the community in a pretty big way.
Cool. Let's talk really quickly about where do you see bikepacking going? Are there any future trends? And lastly, how do people interact or support bikepacking routes?
Good questions. I think the growth that we've seen in bikepacking is over the last 5 years has been massive, and it's phenomenal to see. I love it, and I think that's going to continue as more people figure out where to go ride. Like that's been from some of the clinics and things that I've done over the years. That's become the biggest question. Like, okay, I've got the gear. I think I know what I'm doing. I've done a quick overnighter. Now where do I go? And helping people figure out where to go, whether it's route development or just publicizing routes that are out there already, things like that. So I think the growth is just going to continue. I think more and more kind of traditional road tours are finding their way into the dirt realm, and especially just on dirt road routes. And so I think it's really important to keep developing dirt and gravel oriented routes for those people, because there definitely are fewer riders that are wanting to tour on roadways, paved roads these days. So supporting that is going to be important, and I think that trend will continue. And then I think one of the big challenges that we face as a community is really supporting women in bikepacking and trying to encourage more women to do that, because looking at the membership that Bikepacking Routes has and the kind of responses to surveys and everything we get, it's so hugely tilted toward male riders. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. And I think we can all do a lot to help get more women excited about multi-day trips and out there doing that. And so I'm hoping that that'll be a trend that we see, right, is kind of leveling out that difference. And then I think we're going to continue to see more and more expansion of bikepacking visibility into the mainstream, into mainstream media, and into more mainstream outdoor industry. And I think that's just going to help all of this continue to grow. So I think at least for the short term, right, we're going to see more of the same. Long term, harder to say. I mean, all of these sports reach a peak at some point and kind of level off. And I'm sure that we'll get there at some point. But no sight of that yet. Cool. And then as far as supporting bikepacking routes, you can go to bikepackingroutes.org and donate to support us. Our resources this year have gone predominantly to route development, advocacy, and conservation education. And so at this point, we're still all volunteer organization, and so are putting our money into accomplishing our mission. And we'll be having a fundraiser starting in about a week or so for about a week. And we'll be releasing our t-shirts and hats and some of that stuff so you can represent and spread the word. And we've got a crew of folks that are going to be helping pioneer the Wild West route next summer. There will be probably about 30 of them. We've got some constraints from the Navajo Nation where the route traverses next year, that they want a small number of riders the first time through, just to make sure no unexpected issues arise. But we're working on finalizing who all of those pioneers are going to be. And so if folks are interested in being part of that and helping us with some of the kind of the final route development process for that route, they can reach out through our website and let us know. And I think that's about it. If folks want to get involved, we're always looking for ways that individuals can help. So you can reach out to us also.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kurt, for taking the time out of your morning to chat with us. So I'm going to put all the links to that we talked about in I'm going to cut this part. Thank God this isn't a live show.
We're doing so good.
I know. So I'm going to wrap up the video here. And if you guys want to check out Bikepacking Roots and help support the organization, I'm going to put all those links in the description. Be sure to check it out. And if you guys have suggestions for other people that we should interview on the channel, leave those in the comments below. And if you like the video, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, Kurt.
Thank you, Russ.